multiple sclerosis, autism have all shown benefits from a ketogenic diet. Approximately 70% of the calories are from fat. This does vary from person to person. And so, okay, here we go again. Is a ketogenic diet a paleo diet? I would argue that, yeah, it's a variation on a theme. I cannot get this mouse to work. There we go. Oh, okay. All right, so these diets are similar because they avoid grains and legumes and they emphasize whole and processed food. Keto differs because dairy is not only allowed but encouraged. It's a good fat source, and obviously we need to keep our fat calories up. Again, there's a macronutrient breakdown, whereas Jimmy said paleo is macronutrient agnostic. It's a little bit different. Now, and I am sorry, Jimmy, there is generally, no, you're fine. There is generally a higher use of artificial sweeteners in a ketogenic world, but there's a good reason for this. If you want a sweet treat, you're not going to go to honey or maple syrup to keep your carbs down. So that's a little bit of a difference. All right. This next couple of diets I'm actually going to group together. How many of you heard of GAPS? A few, or SCD? A few less. Okay, these are similar plans. So the GAPS diet stands for Gut and Psychology Syndrome. This was made known by Dr. Campbell McBride, who worked with patients that had gut distress, and she noticed that there was a link between their GI issues and brain health. So she would notice that if patients that had issues with abdominal pain, bloating, constipation, they may also struggle with depression or autism or schizophrenia. The specific carbohydrate diet, on the other hand, SCD, was made popular by Elaine Gottschall. This diet's generally used for inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, and irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, to calm gastrointestinal symptoms. So I want to make clear, this is not a low-carb diet. This is a specific carbohydrate diet. And when the carbs are used in this diet, they're simple carbs that are recommended, not complex carbs. The reason for that is if you have a lot of gastrointestinal distress, your digestion is not adequate. It's not good. So if you bring down this big carbohydrate molecule, the digestive tract can't handle that. Also, a lot of patients with inflammatory bowel disease, like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, have dysbiosis. That's actually the reason most likely that they have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis to begin with. And someone with dysbiosis, that means that they have an imbalance of good and bad bacteria in the GI tract. So when you give them a large carbohydrate molecule, the pathogenic bacteria really like this. They can break that down and eat it. And so these diets, the idea is you want food that you can digest because your digestive tract needs something simple, but that pathogenic bacteria cannot. All right, and then I kind of mentioned on the slide, these are easily digestible foods just for your gut health. So bone broth is really highly recommended on these gut healing diets. Fermented foods, of course, you want good bacteria in your GI tract, so things like sauerkraut, yogurt, kimchi, all recommended. Strongly cooked meals, raw foods can be harder to digest, etc. Okay, and these diets are actually being used now as therapeutic intervention with patients. This is a small study, but I still think it's interesting. This looked at 7 children with Crohn's disease who had moderate symptoms. So these kids rated their symptoms of abdominal pain, bloating, blood in the stools from 0 to 70. And you can see before dietary intervention, they had symptoms somewhere between 10 and 30, so moderate gastrointestinal symptoms. After they went on a specific carbohydrate diet, 3 months after and 6 months after, these kids were completely asymptomatic. And they either had no changes in their medication or they were able to go off of some of their medications. So even though it's a small study, I think it's really exciting that children that are suffering from these terrible gastrointestinal symptoms are now asymptomatic. And that's neat in and of itself, but the researchers in this study looked at some other factors as well. A lot of these kids were what were called failure to thrive, meaning that they were underweight and under height for their age. And this was the case because they weren't getting adequate nutrition from their diet. Their gastrointestinal tracts weren't working. All of the kids that were failure to thrive after going on a specific carbohydrate diet caught up to a normal height and weight. Also, several of the children were anemic because they were losing blood in the stool. The anemia normalized on a specific carb diet. 2 markers of inflammation normalized, so CRP in the blood and calprotectin in the stool normalized on a specific carb diet. So a lot of markers improved on this diet, which I think is really exciting that food alone did that. And so just to kind of harp on this point one more time, these diets work because we are trying to correct the dysbiosis. We're trying to correct the imbalance in the GI tract that caused these issues to begin with. And not eating these complex carbohydrate molecules can help with that. All right, so our gaps in SCD paleo diets. They are a whole foods diet, so you know where I'm going with this. They are a variation on a theme. Okay, these plans do avoid grains. They encourage whole and processed foods. Gaps in SCD do allow soaked legumes, certain soaked legumes, because they can be easy to digest. Fermented dairy is allowed and encouraged to get good bacteria flowing in the gut. Not all fruits and vegetable carbohydrates are allowed. Again, we're avoiding those complex carbs. And there is an introductory phase with these plans that allows for further bowel rest, so a lot of broth, just really easily digestible things for a couple of days. Okay. So low FODMAPs. Anyone heard this term? FODMAP? A few people. I think it's kind of a funky word, right? It's like, what the heck does that mean? It stands for, and this is a mouthful, fermentable oligomonosaccharides and polyols. So that's kind of a mess. But all this means is that high FODMAP foods are fermentable in your gut. And so a low FODMAP diet is foods that are not really all that fermentable. So does that mean that fermentation in the gut is a bad thing? No. On the contrary, fermentation in the gut is incredibly important in the large intestine. You want a lot of bacteria in the large intestine for good gut health. But unfortunately, some people will develop a condition called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO. And it's just what it sounds like. It's overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine. And there's not supposed to be a lot of bacteria there. So if this condition develops, then you get molecules that come down that are fermentable. They get to the small intestine, and the bacteria that are there that aren't supposed to be there start to break down these foods, and then you get products of fermentation, water, gas. And so the people that have this condition are really uncomfortable. They have a lot of gas, bloating, abdominal pain, sometimes acid reflux. I think this is really cool. There are a couple of researchers that work on SIBO, Dr. Seebecker and Dr. Pimentel, and they feel that somewhere between 50 and 84% of irritable bowel syndrome is actually SIBO. And this is awesome because for many, many years, irritable bowel syndrome hasn't really had a cause that we know of behind it. So patients will go into their doctor and they'll say, yeah, my bowel is really irritable. And the doctor will say, well, you have irritable bowel syndrome. It's like, well, okay, yeah, that's what I just told you. So that's a really big problem. And then they give them a prescription for Prozac, and that's kind of it. And so now there's a cause. There's a cause for 50 to 84%, and that means it's treatable. All right. And I just kind of want to point out that a low FODMAP diet, it's a lot like gaps in SCD, but it's slightly more restrictive. Also, it's meant to be very short term, so somewhere between 3 to 6 months on this plan while you're being treated for SIBO with antibiotics, with herbal antibiotics, and then you want to go back on these fermentable foods because, of course, we want our large intestine to still be healthy, and we want to have those fermentation products going. And these are healthy foods. FODMAP foods are things like onions, broccoli, garlic, right? These are good for you, so you don't want to be without them long term. All right, this is also being used now as therapeutic intervention for IBS. Again, a small study, but still interesting. So there were 30 patients with a diagnosis of IBS and 7 control patients that were put on a low FODMAP diet for 21 days and a standard Australian diet for 21 days, which is a lot like standard American, pretty much junk. You can see on the bottom, the healthy controls that had no gut problems rated their symptoms while on a standard diet and while on a low FODMAP diet, and their symptoms were basically the same, very low level GI symptoms. On the top, these are your IBS patients, and the solid line is symptoms of gas, abdominal pain, stool irregularities on a typical Australian diet, so a level of about 50. And then on a low FODMAP diet, their symptoms were basically cut in half, so 30 to 25, and you can kind of see over time it tends to improve as well. So this was just 21 days, and these diets would be somewhere between 3 to 6 months. Definite improvement. Okay, so is a low FODMAP diet a paleo diet? It's a little of a stretch, but I'll explain why I feel like this falls into the category. It's a variation on a theme. Are you guys ready to dance? Okay. It's gluten-free, lactose-free. It avoids legumes, generally avoids artificial sweeteners. It's not necessarily grain or dairy free, because not all grains and dairy are highly fermentable. That being said, these patients have a lot of inflammation in their GI tract, so grains and dairy don't always go that well anyway, and they end up avoiding it. It's more paleo than you think. Let's stop that, that's awful. All right. I like these charts. Dr. Seebecker put these together. These are a combination low FODMAP SCD diet chart. They're online. This is just the vegetables example, but she went through and did this for fruits, meats, etc. And a lot of the time these diets do have to be combined because those with irritable bowel syndrome tend to do well on both low FODMAP, SCD, and sometimes other plans as well. So this just kind of helps those working through some GI issues to know what the heck to eat for a while. All right, AIP, Autoimmune Paleo. Does this sound familiar? Yeah, this is really becoming a lot more well-known because autoimmune disease is on the rise. So why is that? Let's talk about first why autoimmune disease is theorized to occur. It's this concept of leaky gut plus molecular mimicry. And so leaky gut can occur for a lot of reasons. Basically, the cells in your GI tract are supposed to be bound together tightly, but something can irritate it, like a food intolerance or NSAIDs like ibuprofen, stress, antibiotics. All of these things can come along and cause the cells to leak. When that happens, food gets out of the GI tract into the bloodstream. And that's not a good thing. The food isn't supposed to be in the bloodstream in that form. So the immune system sees this as foreign and attacks it. And unfortunately, sometimes the proteins in your food can look a lot like the proteins that make up you in your own body, your own tissues. So for example, there's a protein in gluten that looks a lot like molecules in your thyroid. And so you eat gluten, say you're sensitive to it, your gut becomes leaky, it leaks out into the bloodstream, your immune system attacks that, and then it turns around and says, oh, that thyroid tissue looks a whole lot like this gluten molecule we just attacked, we should probably attack that as well. And then you can get something called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune disease. So there's this cause where depending on what you eat, what leaks out of your gut, what your immune system is confusing with your tissue, you'll have different symptoms, maybe joint pain, muscle pain, rashes, gut issues, a whole slew of conditions. Now, with an AIP diet, the foods that tend to cause a leaky gut are the foods that are eliminated for a period of time. We'll talk about some of these, but those are the foods that are restricted on AIP. They're restricted for a short period of time again, usually about 6 months, and then we try to reintroduce foods as a challenge to see what is tolerated and doesn't bring back symptoms. Also, over this time, you're allowing the leaky gut to heal. Okay, now until recently, there were no studies using an autoimmune paleo protocol in clinical medicine to improve symptoms. But Dr. Terry Walls, who I know a lot of you are familiar with, has changed that. She is a physician who has multiple sclerosis and basically put herself into remission by going on an autoimmune and ketogenic kind of combination diet. This particular study, it's small, it's 8 patients. Fatigue was what they measured primarily. So she put 8 patients on an autoimmune protocol for a year and measured the severity of their fatigue, which is a big complaint for those with MS. 6 out of 8 patients after a year reported significant improvement. So you can see the purple bar is before, and then most of them had significant improvement over the next several months. And this is really cool. She's actually taking the study further. She's going to push it out another 2 years, have a bigger sample size. She's going to have a control group that's on a standard American diet. And she's looking at some other factors as well, looking at inflammation, looking at walking speed, at pain, other issues that patients with MS suffer from. And the data isn't out yet, unfortunately, but there's little birds that say that so far preliminary data is all positive. Be interesting to see how this pans out. All right, so is an autoimmune paleo diet paleo? Yeah, I mean, it has paleo in the name, so yeah. It's grain-free, dairy-free, legume-free, you get the gist. It differs because it's more restrictive, but it eliminates common paleo foods like nightshades, peppers, potatoes, tomatoes. Nuts and seeds are eliminated, coffee, eggs, chocolate, all of these things. But again, like I said, the idea is to add things back later to see what you personally tolerate. All right. And then we're going to end with low histamine. I think this is the least known out of these 5 variations, but I think it's important. I just listened to a podcast a couple weeks ago that stated that 1 out of 200 people in the United States probably are histamine intolerant and don't necessarily know it. So let's talk about what this is. First, what is histamine? You're probably all familiar. If you've ever had seasonal allergies, you know how miserable histamine can make you feel. It's that molecule that makes you feel itchy and stuffy and rashy when you're allergic to something. Histamine intolerance is just that. You have an intolerance to the level of histamine in your body. And so why does that happen? There's a few different reasons. First, the mast cells in the body, which are the cells that secrete histamine, can overactivate. And that tends to happen in response to inflammation. So anything that can cause inflammation in the body can cause this release of histamine. Or you might have a problem coping with clearing histamine from the body. So if you have a problem detoxifying histamine, like maybe you have an MTHFR, mutation, thank you. Or if you have a genetic issue that leads to the reduction in DAO, which is an enzyme that breaks down histamine, then you'll have higher levels than the average bear, and then you might have histamine intolerance. Finally, SIBO, again, going back to our intestinal problem, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, is an overgrowth of bacteria, and bacteria produce histamine. So when that occurs, you might have higher levels again. All right, and so symptom-wise, it would be kind of what you expect. You might be itchy, you might have a stuffy nose, you might have watery eyes, itchy eyes, hives. But because this is an inflammatory condition, you can also have joint pain, fatigue, depression. It's a systemic kind of issue. And I want to make it very clear, this is not a food allergy. So there are foods that can raise the histamine levels in the body, but you're not allergic to these foods. This is not an anaphylactic reaction. It's an intolerance. So imagine a bucket. You have a histamine bucket in your body, and a lot of things get thrown into this bucket causing the histamine to elevate. So inflammation can be one of them. Stress, that can actually increase your histamine levels. Digestion, just eating alone raises the histamine in the body. And then you have a genetic abnormality where you can't break it down. So it starts to rise and rise and rise. As it's rising, you actually have no symptoms whatsoever, but when it gets to the top of that bucket and overflows, that's when symptoms occur. And so there's a lot of ways that we won't get into that the body can lower histamine. There's a lot of things that you can do to lower your histamine so that you can tolerate the foods again over time. The foods tend to be things like bone broth, egg whites, fermented foods. Think about that. There's bacteria in fermented foods, and bacteria raise histamine. Meats and fish, unfortunately, especially if they're not incredibly fresh, can be a problem. Bacteria love to break down meat, right? That's why it goes rancid so quickly if we leave it out. So they have to be really fresh to keep that lower. But again, a lot of the time these foods can be added back. And so I want to point this out. Things like bone broth and eggs and fermented foods, those are great foods for gut healing. Well, as we heard earlier, the GABS diet, the STD diet, those are strongly encouraged. And those are encouraged for people with things like SIBO also, for gut dysbiosis. So I've seen this happen time and time again. Patients go on those types of diets, and then all of a sudden they have chronic sinus infections and hives, and they don't know why. It might be that this is a secondary issue. So it's never cut and dry. There's always different pieces of these different diets that have to be put together for patient care. Is the low histamine diet paleo? It's really not, but kind of is. I'll tell you why. It's a variation on a theme. It avoids processed foods. You want to avoid the processed junk to keep inflammation down, keep histamine down. Here's where it gets a little hairy. It's not necessarily grain-free or dairy-free or legume-free. Meats and fish have to be really fresh, like we talked about. Certain fruits and vegetables are restricted. Again, though, it ends up being grain, dairy, and legume-free a lot of the time anyway, because those can be inflammatory for people. So when I work with patients on low histamine, it ends up being low histamine paleo. Okay. Oh no, we're missing a picture. No. Okay. Well, that's all right. It's kind of the same point that Jimmy was making. We're the same in a sense that we all want to be healthy, we all want to live long, healthy lives, but we're different. We all have different health challenges that we're dealing with, and so we may have to take pieces of these different diets for ourselves. Any healthcare practitioner in this room will know that we get patients that come in and say, I've really been struggling with my weight and I want you to help me with that, and I feel inflamed. My joints hurt, sometimes they're red, they're swollen, my gut sucks, I've been constipated, I've been bloated, I don't know what to do about that. And come to think of it, I have had a rash and some hives, and what's that about? So not everyone will come in cut and dry and having read the textbook about what they're supposed to present like. And because of that, we have to take pieces sometimes from all of these diets to help our patients. Also, as we talked about in the beginning, diet isn't everything. So we have to look at stress management. Sometimes we have to use supplements, medication, counseling, meditation. All of these things can be incredibly helpful. Maybe all you need is to get outside some more, get more exercise, get more vitamin D. So, a couple more thoughts. All of these diets, except ketogenic, are supposed to be short-term interventions because they can lead to some nutritional deficiencies. But I wanted you all to be familiar with them because we hear a lot about these different diets and there's confusion as far as what diet we should really be on. They can all be helpful short-term. If you do feel like one of these kind of resonated with you, definitely talk to a healthcare provider. The bottom line that I'm trying to make is this. It's the same song, right? Oh, and it stopped. But a certain variation might resonate better for you. So, thank you.